Okay, I'll wait until you get the public participants into the meeting to call it.
Okay, here
Call the
they.
meeting to order, Carrie.
Okay, here we go.
Hello.
Honestly, the one we're plugging, obviously that you realize is he keeps track.
Is that everyone, Carrie?
Yeah, I just have one person in the waiting room who's called owner that I'm trying to get a name for.
Okay. I'll wait to get that completed.
Carrie, do you need a name from us or?
Your name says Silvio. If there's more than just you there, if you can change your name to include everyone.
Sure, I don't know how to do that, but it's myself and Stefan.
Okay, so if you hover over your screen where your face is, there's three white dots and a blue square.
Yeah,
Yeah, so click on that and it'll say rename.
okay, all right.
That goes for everyone else on the call too. If there's anyone whose name is not in full on their screen right now, if you could change that, that would be perfect so we can properly record the attendance.
Okay, excellent. Okay, I think we got it.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Yours is the phone. I can't do it. Turn the phone on.
If everyone that's not speaking, if you could please make sure your microphones are muted. That'll make things flow a lot smoother. You ready to go, Carrie?
Yes, you can begin.
Okay. I'd like to call the meeting to order. And I have a resolution of such. So if I could have a mover and a seconder for this resolution. Bob, Wendy, resolution number 014-2022 that the February 3rd, 2022 public meeting of the Lakehead Rural Planning Board be opened. The time being 5:33 p.m. Anyone in opposition to this motion? Seeing none, the meeting is now opened. And can I have a mover and a seconder for the resolution approving the agenda? Bob and Gordon, resolution number 015-2022. It's been moved and seconded that the February 3rd, 2022 public meeting agenda of the Lakehead Rural Planning Board be approved. Is there anyone in opposition? Seeing none. Is there any disclosures of pecuniary interest in tonight's proceedings from the board members? Seeing none, that is good. We have a lot of people on the line today, which is great. And we also have a few things that I need to do that are a little bit different from a normal public meeting. So On our agenda, we have the chair will read the procedures for the public meeting and ask the secretary treasurer to indicate how notice of the application was provided. It's number 4 in our agenda. I will do that now. So the chair, myself, will introduce the application. The chair will ask the secretary treasurer to provide information on how notice of the application was posted and why the meeting is being done virtually. Oh, I guess I should read out the actual application. Application ZBLA 01-2016 has been received from Stefan Huzan, acting as agent for Lempiala Sand and Gravel, for an amendment to the Gorham and Ware zoning bylaw to rezone the property known as PCL 8755 SCC TBF PT Broken Lot 18 Concession 7 Gorham as in LPA 33239, except part 1, 2, 3, RP 55R816 in Unit 1 PLD-72 Gorham Township, District of Thunder Bay, from rural to extractive industrial to prevent a new aggregate operation.
So Tracy, it's here.
Anyone who's on, if you could please mute, that would be great. Thank you. I will ask the secretary treasurer to provide information on how notice the application was posted and why the meeting is being done virtually. I will ask the planning consultant to review the preliminary planning report. I will ask the secretary treasurer if any correspondence was received. I will ask if there's anyone in attendance that would like to speak in favor of the application. I will ask if anyone in attendance would like to speak against the application. I will ask the board if there are any questions of the planning consultant or the applicant. And at that point, the meeting will be adjourned. I have a few other items to add to the meeting procedures. Like I've already asked, if you could please keep your microphones muted. And if you are not a member of the Lakehead Rural Planning Board, if you could please turn off your video unless you are actually addressing the meeting, that would help things flow a little smoother. And if you are addressing the meeting, if you could turn your video on, that would also help us to get things rolling. And if you haven't already done so, we're encouraging written comments to be submitted to Carrie at our office. In the interest of having as many people as possible and in accordance with our proper procedures, the agent for the applicant will be given 10 minutes to speak, and members of the public wishing to comment on the presented application will be given 5 minutes. A decision will not be made on this application today, as we still need to hear public and agency comments, and we need to give time for our consultant and staff to complete the report. So all that out of the way, we will move into item 5 on our agenda, which is the first application to be considered. And it is ZBLA 01-2016 Lempiala Sand and Gravel, which has been presented by the agent Stefan Huzan. The application has been brought forward for a new decision from Stefan Huzan, acting as agent on behalf of Lempiala Sand and Gravel, to rezone the parcel from rural to extractive industrial. The property is legally described as parcel 8755, section TBF, part Broken Lot 18, concession 7, township of Gorham. The subject land is approximately 30 hectares in side and is located at the southeast corner of Highway 591 and Trout Lake Road. It is approximately 20 kilometers northwest of Thunder Bay. So the next item is our planning consultant, and welcome, Jeff. I will let you present your report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had to unmute myself there. I almost forgot. So by way of introduction and for the participants at the public meeting, what I'd like to say first is this preliminary planning report is a public document. It has been posted online on the Lakehead Rural Planning Board website, along with the application and all the supporting technical reports and studies that have been submitted by the applicant. So with that in mind, and I would encourage you to go to the website, have a look at the preliminary planning report, digest it at your leisure. I'm not going to read the entire planning report today. It's about 30 pages long. So in the interest of time, and by the fact that it has been posted and is available for everyone attending the meeting and anyone. I'm just going to kind of go through and hit the main points of the planning report. I want to give this application a bit of context in terms of how we got to where we are today in the proceedings, and provide some key points on the details of the application, on the framework that the Lakehead Rural Planning Board works under in making planning decisions in Ontario under the Planning Act and other pieces of legislation and policy. I will speak a bit about the planning issues surrounding this application that are typical land use planning issues in any aggregate, in any rezone application to extractive industrial for an aggregate operation. I also have included agency comments and public comments from the public in my planning report. Those sections are not complete because we're still awaiting all the comments from the agencies as a result of circulation of this rezoning application. And of course, we have received quite a number of written comments already via email on this application. But that's also what this statutory public meeting is for. It's an opportunity for the public to provide to the Lakehead Planning Board members their thoughts and opinions on this particular application. So we'll wait to receive all of the email written correspondence, and your participation in the meeting here today will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting, and we'll have a chance to go over them before the final report is issued. I'm also going to talk just a little bit about some of the land use planning issues that were identified in the previous LPAT decision. That's PL 180754. They also provide some context for this discussion because, and I'll go over this in the introduction, the LPAT sent this particular, the LPAT repealed the previous zoning bylaw that was approved and has sent it back to the Lakehead Rural Planning Board for another decision. So I'll kind of close on that. By way of introduction and to continue on April 20th, 2020, the Lakehead, the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal, as it was known now, it is now the OLT, the Ontario Land Tribunal. There's been a change in legislation. It functions much like the old Ontario Municipal Board did before there was an LPAT, but they issued a decision, an order actually, not just a decision, on April 29th, 2020, that upheld the appeal by Kevin Matthews and Robin Latimer, the Trout Lake Campers Association, and Leslie Walker Larson against Lempiella Sand and Gravel in a case involving the rezoning of this property for an aggregate pit operation from rural to extractive industrial. The decision, as I mentioned earlier, repealed the previous zoning bylaw and ordered the Lakehead Rural Planning Board to make a new decision. Lempiella Sand and Gravel has now submitted a revised application to the Lakehead Rural Planning Board, and that is the application that's before us here tonight. My planning report tonight will outline, as I mentioned earlier, the land use planning issues associated with this application, and my final planning report will not be issued until we have received all the agency comments and addressed all of the comments from the public, both written and verbal here tonight. A bit of background on this particular application, and I'll just go through this very quickly. Again, this was appealed previously, this zoning bylaw amendment. It was zoning bylaw 004/2018, pursuant to section 34 of the Planning Act. Once it was appealed, there was a case management conference previously on May 28th, 2019, where the issue was scoped. And then that was followed up by another telephone conference on August 28th, 2019, to discuss settlement, if there was any settlement possible. There was not. So following the telephone conference, a 2-day hearing was set for this particular rezone application. The tribunal at the hearing received submissions from 3 appellants. Again, Kevin Matthews, Robin Latimer, and the Trout Lake Campers Association, and Leslie Walker Larson. Opinion evidence was provided at that hearing by Lee White of Cortec. Silvio Di Gregorio of Lempiella Sand and Gravel provided some evidence of Lempiella's operation. Stefan Huzan of Northern Planning provided opinion evidence at the hearing, and Anthony, or Tony Usher, as we know him in the planning world, provided opinion evidence for the Trout Lake Campers Association. The tribunal considered all of the evidence at the hearing, and it's important that they only consider evidence. They don't consider opinion and hearsay. So they considered all the evidence that was provided, and that's when they subsequently issued an order upholding the appeal and sending the and requesting or directing the Lakehead Rural Planning Board to make a new decision. And that's where we are here today. Some of the details of the application, I'm really not going to spend a lot of time on. I think everybody's more than familiar with the location of the subject land and the size of the subject land, the legal description of the subject land. That has to be detailed in my planning report, though. So that is included. Road access is off of Highway 591. It's important to note that that is a highway that is owned and maintained by the province of Ontario through the Ministry of Transportation. For servicing, it's in a rural area, so there are no municipal services in this particular location. And there is no, it's an area without municipal incorporation, so there's no municipal government in place at this particular location of the subject property. However, it is within the jurisdiction of the Lakehead Rural Planning Board. The official plan of the subject property is zoned rural, and the zoning bylaw is also rural, and the application is to rezone a portion of that property, but not all of it, to extractive industrial for the extraction of aggregate resources. The surrounding land uses in the area, I'm sure everyone attending the meeting is well familiar with them. They are really, the key land uses are to the north and northeast. Of course, a seasonal waterfront subdivision on Trout Lake, and that's identified as a sensitive use as a seasonal residential subdivision. And the other key land use would be the McIntyre River and the wetland complex that surrounds the McIntyre River, again, to the east and the northeast of the subject property. So that's that section of the report, just general details of the application. It's important to consider the legislative and policy framework for the Lakehead Rural Planning Board to make a decision. And there are several pieces of legislation and provincial policy that provide guidance to the Lakehead Rural Planning Board. The first one, of course, is the Ontario Planning Act. And the Planning Act sets out in a fair bit of detail what the purpose of the act is, and indicates in Section 2 of the Planning Act how planning can proceed in Ontario in the public interest. And there are quite a number of provisions in the Planning Act that set that out. The other key parts of the Planning Act are Section 16 and 34. Section 16 of the Planning Act directs approval authorities like the Lakehead Rural Planning Board to prepare an official plan, a long-term land use planning document that provides them with guidance in making decisions on applications such as this. And Section 34 of the Planning Act provides approval authorities the power to develop zoning bylaws, which regulates two things: the use of the property and where buildings and structures can be located on their property in terms of setbacks from property lines and height, bulk, density, those types of things. So there are the couple of important sections of the Planning Act, the official plan and the zoning bylaw. Moving on, the next important policy document that the Lakehead Rural Planning Board has to have regard to is called the Ontario Provincial Policy Statement, or PPS. The most recent version is PPS 2020, so it's fairly recent. And in that document, in my preliminary planning report, I go over all of the pertinent sections of the PPS that I noted, and also were noted in previous planning reports, and more importantly, noted by the LPAT in their previous decision in the previous order. So I go through all of the various sections of the PPS that apply to this application. There's another kind of curious document that we have to have regard to. It's called the Northern Growth Plan, approved in 2011. It is a very, very general document. It speaks to some degree on development issues in Northern Ontario. It's very difficult as a planner to hang your hat on one thing, especially as it relates to this application, but I do make some preliminary notes on the Northern Growth Plan. The next document, and perhaps the most important document that the Lakehead Rural Planning Board has to make sure this application is in conformity with, is the Gorham and Ware official plan. And in my planning report, again, I list and note all of the pertinent sections of the Gorham and Ware official plan that provide guidance to the Lakehead Rural Planning Board and their members in making a decision on a zoning bylaw, an application for a zoning bylaw amendment such as this. The next document is the Gorham and Ware zoning bylaw. That's really the nuts and bolts of regulating land use on this subject property and in Gorham and Ware. And all I do in my preliminary planning report is make note of the fact that this is a rural land use planning designation now. I list all the permitted uses that are presently permitted on the property. And then I make a note of the extractive zone or industrial extractive zoning designation, which is what they want to rezone it to, and what uses are permitted in that zone and what buildings and structures are permitted in that zone. So that provides kind of the local legal framework for making decisions on this. The other zone that I took a look at that I think is important in this case is the environmental protection limited use zone. I think that will certainly come into play in my final planning report because that zone can be used in to protect sensitive uses such as the McIntyre River and the wetland ecosystem complex to the east and to the northeast. So that's one that I think we need to keep in mind as we move forward, and I'll be providing a little more detail in my final planning report on that. The last piece of legislation I note is the Aggregate Resources Act, because that is the piece of legislation that Lempiella Sand and Gravel will apply for a license. They need a license from the province of Ontario to proceed with the extraction of aggregate from the property. And the Aggregate Resources Act, particularly in section 12.1, lists a number of provisions that have to be met before a license can be issued. So that's a quick summary of the legislative and approval framework for this rezoning application. Having said all that, looking at the previous LPAT decision, looking at the legislation and the policies that affect land use decisions in this area, I then list a number of planning issues that need to be addressed one way or the other in a decision by the Lakehead Rural Planning Board. One of the most important provisions of the official plan, and I'm just going to read this, it's only one sentence, and I think it's important because it was highlighted on at least one occasion in the LPAT decision. And it says the focus, so this is the focus of my review in the planning report. The focus of this review will be the potential social, environmental, and economic impacts from the proposed development. And the guidance there is that there needs to be a balance between economic, social, and environmental. It can't be all one, it can't be all the other. There has to be kind of a midpoint balance here in evaluating this application. And that was a clear direction that was issued by the LPAC, and it's a clear provision in the Gorham and Ware official plan. So I'm kind of hanging my hat on that one a little bit. Now, moving on, the other key issues that come up is, of course, location and access. The location of this particular property is important because to the north and to the east, there are some sensitive land uses that need to be considered in evaluating this application. So the locations of the property from a site-specific basis is very important. Access is important too, because the proposed access is off of Highway 591, which is a provincial highway. So they will need an entrance permit from the MTO to gain access to this property, which I believe is already underway. But I think the other important thing to note is access is not off the Trout Lake Road. So how you access this subject property and how you get to it is a very important land use consideration. The property size and frontage, I just simply note it's about 30 hectares in size. It's an irregular shape, almost triangular in shape. The size is important too because of the buffering issue that will come up. There will be, and certainly I'll talk a lot about that in my final report, but if you try to put a buffer in to mitigate any potential negative impacts from an aggregate operation, the site has to be big enough to permit both an aggregate pit and have enough land left over to provide an adequate buffer to any other sensitive land uses in the area. So I make a few comments about the size of the property and the configuration of the property. Operational issues are important. Right now, what we're looking at would be an extractive use only with aggregate operations. With other aggregate operations, often you're often looking at things like blasting, crushing, stockpiling, a number of other uses, which also have an impact on the surrounding land uses in the area. A summary statement for Trout Lake Pit called the Category 3 Aggregate License was prepared by TBT Engineering. It sets out in quite a bit of detail what the operational issues of the pit will be, how many trucks, what the volumes will be, those types of issues. The next one is a groundwater assessment. In this particular proposed aggregate extraction operation, they are not looking at impinging on the groundwater supply. The nature of this application requires 1.5 meters of non-disturbed ground between the bottom of the pit and the ground and the top of the groundwater surface. So again, Trout Lake Pit groundwater summary statement was prepared by TBT Engineering with, I think, 6 test pits that models exactly the depth to the groundwater table across the site. So that's also a very important consideration. Natural environment values, there were a couple of studies done, again, by TBT Engineering, but by a qualified biologist. And these are kind of standard environmental review type studies that have to be done for projects such as this or rezones such as this. And there are a range of fisheries, wildlife, wetland complex issues, bats, barn swallows, threatened species, endangered species, all these types of values need to be assessed, and there needs to be a determination of whether or not this proposed operation would have a negative impact on those values. So I list what they are. The next issue that comes up is cultural heritage and archaeology. This again is a standard operating procedure. An archaeological assessment of the property has been done because if there are any important or significant archaeological values that come up in the assessment. They need to be protected, or mitigating measures need to be put in place to make sure no harm comes to some of these cultural heritage values or archaeological artifacts. And there's a study supporting that as well that I'll get into more detail in the final report. But I do make comments in my preliminary report on that as well. And basically, I believe in the archaeological assessment that was done, they didn't find any cultural heritage or archaeological values of any significance on this particular site. If it were close to the water, it'd probably be a different story. But in this backshore location, nothing was identified at this point in time. The two final ones and important ones are air quality and noise assessments. That's again been done by RWDI, an engineering company specializing in air quality and noise assessments. That has to be done before certainly a license can be issued. But as we learned in the LPAT decision, it should also be done before the property is rezoned. So the Lakehead Rural Planning Board members have all the information they need to deal with potential complaints. And I'm sure we may hear some later tonight on air quality and noise that might be associated or will be associated with this proposed operation on the subject property. So I've reviewed the technical reports that have been prepared there, and I make some comments in my report on that. The final section of my report of any substance before the agency review and public comments would be some, I think I made noted seven important points from the LPAT decision. I'm just going to read the heading for each one of them because they provide certainly guidance to me as a professional planner in preparing my report. So there are lessons learned at the previous LPAT appeal, and a lot of these issues have been identified in that order or that decision. One, minimizing land use conflicts. Again, we talked earlier about balancing social, environmental, and economic. So how do you take those three factors into consideration, consider a proposed use, and then if that proposed use proceeds, minimize any land use conflicts between that operation and any potentially sensitive uses in the surrounding area. So that's an important guiding factor. The other thing the LPAT indicated in the previous decision was that the previous buffer that was proposed was inadequate, and it put some numbers in there as well. So I'm considering that in my planning report as we go back and look at this revised application, that the original buffer was probably inadequate, and we probably have to look at something bigger in order to address the previous point I made, which is to minimize land use conflicts. The third, and I've mentioned this before, the LPAT says what is required is a balanced approach to land use. You can't put too much weight on the economic. You can't put too much weight on the environmental or the social. You have to find a balance point between economic, social, and environmental that is kind of fair to the property owners in the area, and including the owners of the subject property. The fourth item, and this is very important, in the previous order, the tribunal found that it was not consistent with the provincial policy statement or the Gorham and Ware official plan. So that's another thing I'm taking a very close look at in my planning report, seeing if this revised application is now in conformity with the PPS and the official plan, with a small note that the PPS has changed a little bit. In the original application, it was PPS 2014. With the revised application, we're now dealing with PPS 2020. So they've changed a little bit, not materially as it affects this application, but I will be using PPS 2020 in my analysis. The fifth is legislative requirement. The tribunal in the previous decision really had its hands tied. Under the old LPAT legislation, it really had only two options. And it could either approve the decision or it could uphold the appeal and send it back to the LPAT for a new decision. That's the way the system worked then. And they chose the latter, where they upheld the appeal and sent it back to the Lakehead Rural Planning Board for a new decision. And here we are here tonight. And really, they're the two final points that I make in that section, that the Lakehead Rural Planning Board is now weighing a new decision on this application. And that pretty well wraps up that section of my planning report. I have a couple of final points to make here, and I'll just repeat them because I've already touched on them. One would be agency comments. In my preliminary report, I identify not all of the agencies, most of them. I think we missed the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, which I'll add to my final report, and who we've actually received agency comments from. So we list all the agencies, and we need to give them some time to make their comments and get them back to Kerry and the Lakehead Rural Planning Board. Once we receive those comments, I'll be addressing them in the final report. And the last item for me, and the reason we're here tonight, would be comments from the public. We've already received quite a number of emails, and we will be recording, and I will be listening very carefully to the comments that we get from the public here tonight. We will pull them together and address them directly in the final planning report. When I prepare that and my summary, and the next steps are that once we have the agency comments and the public comments, I can proceed to prepare a final report. In the final report, I will be making a recommendation. I don't know what that recommendation is yet. We've received a lot of information on the revised application. It does plug some holes that were identified by the LPAT in their order. However, if new information comes to light from the agency review and tonight from the public, we take it seriously. We will address all concerns we hear tonight based on evidence provided. And it's at that point then I can finalize my report and make a recommendation to the Lakehead Rural Planning Board. In closing, I would emphasize that I'm not a decision maker. I do the technical work on behalf of the Lakehead Rural Planning Board by preparing a planning report and making a recommendation. At the end of the day, the power through the Planning Act resides with the Lakehead Rural Planning Board, and they will take agency comments into consideration, comments from the public like tonight, and the emails under consideration, my report under consideration, conversations with Kerry Reed, the planner, under consideration. They'll weigh all this information before they make a decision. How long will that take? Receiving the agency comments, we're not going to give them forever, but and we will need some time to digest the comments we get from the public tonight and any issues that are raised. But my best guess would be probably we'll need 4 to 6 weeks to be able to, for me to be able to complete my planning report and make a recommendation to the Lakehead Rural Planning Board, one way or the other, on this revised planning application. So that's kind of the thumbnail sketch of my planning report. And if there are any questions from the planning board members at this point, for clarification purposes, I'd be happy to answer them. But the public part of the meeting, I don't think is really open yet. So just any technical questions from planning board members, I'd be happy to help out.
Yeah, actually, I have a question. One of the points that the LPAT criticized the previous board for was failure to impose any kind of regulation on pit activities. The board was criticized for just delegating that to the Ministry of Natural Resources. But in fact, doesn't section 66 sub 1 of the Aggregate Resources Act mandate that the MNR is the sole regulatory body for pit activities? So basically the board can either say, yes, we will rezone for this pit, or no, we won't. But beyond that, the board basically has no say what goes on in that pit. Isn't that correct?
Partially. The board can consider what I call a site-specific zoning bylaw amendment, which would begin to screw things down a little bit. I think if you go back to that LBAT decision, one of the things that the tribunal said was there are a number of issues that should have been addressed before the board made a decision, and don't leave everything just to the Aggregate Resources Act license. And I think that's what we're looking for in this rezoning process, just to try to get more information, be a little more specific in terms of analyzing the application. And there are some site-specific things that the board can do on the property. Enforcement of a zoning bylaw is a difficult, trust me, with 35 years experience, the enforcement of a zoning bylaw is difficult on a good day. However, it can be done. Typically, what we find is the planning board through the zoning, and the applicant needs to have an extractive industrial designation before an aggregate license can even be issued. That's part of the in section 12 of the Aggregate Resources Act. But I would argue that the real enforcement power, once if it's approved, and that's a big if, but the real enforcement power is with the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry through the aggregate license. That's the nuts and bolts of enforcement, because they can shut them down at any time. It's very difficult to enforce a zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaw is really the enabling legislation locally to allow them to proceed to get approval for an aggregate license.
Yeah.
So there are enforcement powers. There are enforcement powers both with through the zoning and through the aggregate license, but the real enforcement is with the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry through the license and the conditions associated with that license.
I understand that, but if I read the Aggregate Resources Act correctly, no bylaw that any municipality makes that attempts to regulate activities on the site. So that could include hours of operation. It could include the width of any setbacks around the property, all that sort of stuff. Can't actually be mandated by a planning board. It has to be regulated through the Aggregate Resources Act licensing process.
Certainly use and setbacks can. I mean, that's our tool in zoning. Where will the pit physically be located? That the Lakehead Rural Planning Board has that power by putting in setbacks or clearly describing what will be zoned extractive industrial, and anything outside of that, they cannot proceed with that use. So there is the power in that way through zoning. But again, yeah, the minutia or the nuance associated with the license, real, hours of operation, dust suppression, noise, a lot of these other things, the teeth of enforcement is through the license.
And the other thing is that a license holder can apply for an amendment to their operating plan at any time once the license is granted. Is that correct?
That would be true.
In fact, they can apply to excavate into the water table without any notice to the municipality if it's approved by the Ministry of Natural Resources.
But whatever they can apply to make an amendment, but whatever amendment they apply still needs to be in conformity with that, with whatever, if there's a zoning bylaw amendment approved, it still has to be in conformity with that amendment as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Port. Are there any other questions from the board members? And we'll have opportunity to ask more questions, obviously, later on in this meeting and also in subsequent meetings. I've got a note from the host of the meeting, who's Carrie. We've got a few people on the call today that we don't know who you are. So if you could either respond to the chat from Carrie, Or if you could change your screen name to include your last name, then we will properly be able to notify you of any decisions and have a proper record of who's attending this meeting. So,
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to turn off my video and my audio. I will continue to participate in the meeting, but I'll give up my spot to the next participants in the meeting. So while you won't be able to see me or hear me, I will be around.
okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Port. Okay, moving on. I now have come to the portion of the meeting. We will ask the applicant if he wishes to present any comments.
There you go.
Go ahead, Stefan.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, my name is Stefan Huzan. I'm here with Mr. De Gregorio, the applicant, and I like to do a brief summary statement. This summary statement covers materials that have been submitted to the Lakehead Rural Planning Board, which is a planning policy report, as well as a policy report addendum. And like all of the other documents that have been submitted by the applicant, these are available on a shared website for access to the public to review at their leisure. In terms of the summary report, it summarizes the details of the other reports, and I will go through it very, very briefly. Both the Gorham official plan and the overarching provincial policy statement 2020 state that aggregate resources should be extracted as much as possible, provided any adverse effects on surrounding uses can be mitigated and minimized. The Gorham official plan maps the subject property as in the rural and the use limitation areas on Schedule A1, and on Schedule B1 shows about half of the subject property is in the aggregate resources area. Therefore, the use for aggregate resources is appropriate in the rural designation and in the aggregate resources area. Various policies in the Gorham official plan permit aggregate resource extraction in the rural area. In addition, Gorham official plan rural policies call for specific setbacks in an implementing zoning bylaw. Therefore, a rezoning of the lands from rural to extractive industrial with setbacks is an appropriate planning tool. Approval. The policies of the Gorham official plan specify that natural heritage matters, specify the natural heritage matters to which setbacks should apply based on site-specific studies. Similarly, the Gorham official plan lists the adverse effects for which setbacks should be established, again, on a site-specific basis for a particular operation. The establishment of the above setbacks on a site to be rezoned is the mechanism directed by the Gorham official plan that would implement the principle of compatibility noted in various policies. It is a fundamental principle of planning for impacts that all proposed measures are to be based on sound technical evidence as it relates to acceptable standards. Based on the technical analysis of the property in regard to natural heritage, specifically fisheries, fishery habitat, wildlife, endangered or species at risk, significant wildlife habitats, and identified areas of natural and scientific interest, it was found that the 120-meter buffer setback from the wetland to the south, and the 120-meter buffer setback from the edge of the McIntyre River wetland are appropriate and sufficient to properly protect identified natural heritage features. The operation mitigation and setback measures are based, excuse me, wrong paragraph. Based on technical analysis of the proposed operation as it relates to possible adverse effects due to noise, odor, and particulate emissions, technical site-specific studies have determined that A, the 30-meter buffer adjacent to the highway is appropriate, and B, that the 60-meter buffer, which includes a 3-meter high berm, is also appropriate along the northeast boundary of the property to properly protect area-sensitive uses from excessive levels of forecast adverse effects from the proposed aggregate operation. It is important to note that these setbacks are based on an amending zoning bylaw, which will not permit any blasting, will not permit crushing, nor sorting, nor washing on site. In effect, the zoning bylaw would regulate and limit the use of these lands to extractive and export only. And those operational features are the basis for the technically recommended setbacks. It is my opinion as an expert and qualified land use planner that the rezoning of the subject property with the buffer setbacks as identified is appropriate to mitigate potential adverse effects and is in accordance with the applicable compatibility policies of both the Gorham official plan and the PPS 2020. Finally, in considering the zoning, it would also be appropriate to note the support that is implied by the growth plan of Northern Ontario. That plan calls for both intergeographic and inter-ministry coordination. Because the proposed zoning would allow for compatible extraction of as much aggregate reserves as possible, and because associated approval of the owner's application for aggregate extraction license under the Aggregate Resources Act would bring in additional mitigation actions to the property. So the reason that the growth plan is also supportive is coordination and the use of the Aggregate Resources Act in this case. And regulations to control operations are not available under the Gorham zoning bylaw. The regulations available under the Aggregate Resources Act include detailed regulations of the site plan, with designated extraction procedures, hours of operation, and the maintenance of mitigation measures, as well as progressive site rehabilitation. It is therefore my conclusion and opinion that the proposed rezoning is appropriate, conforms with the intent of the Gorham official plan, is consistent with the PPS 2020, and is supported by the growth plan of Northern Ontario, all as more detailed in my policy analysis report and addendum, and therefore the application should be approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Huzan. I will ask now the Secretary Treasurer if there's been any communications received from any supporters or objectors.
Thank you. Yes, we did receive public comment. We received several letters in support of the application that were submitted by the agent to the applicant. All of the letters of support, however, are dated 2018. from the following: North Shore, Canada Concrete, Lafarge, Miller Precast, A1 Superior Paving, TBC Inc., and Steve Lampiella. We received numerous letters from that were submitted in opposition to the aggregate operation proposal from the Trout Lake area residents. A summary of the main issues they feel are important when making a decision on this application include health hazards from contaminated soil, water, diesel fumes, and aggregate dust that affect children, the elderly, people with asthma, heart disease, and diabetes, and contain silica, a known carcinogen, safety hazards from increased truck traffic, damage to provincial roads and private property, noise that carries across the lake, aesthetics of views and vistas in a lake residential area, deterioration of property values, and cumulative effects stemming from nearby gravel operations at Surprise Lake and the increasing pressures on Crown land near Hawkeye and One Island Lake.
Okay, thank you. Is there any questions from the board for about those letters received? Seeing none, I will now ask if there are any supporters that wish to be heard.
Not supported.
Pardon me, supporters of the application that wish to be heard? And I will call the final time for any supporters of the application that wish to be heard. Okay, we'll move on. I will now call for any objectors who wish to be heard. And Carrie, I understand you might have a plan for how we will make this an organized way to have people have their voices heard. And I'd like to remind the people that are commenting that we would like you to keep it to 5 minutes if you can, please. Go ahead, Carrie.
Okay, so the best plan that we've come up with to date is if everyone who is interested in speaking this evening in opposition could put their camera on. We will record all the names and then call each out individually to speak.
So we'll give everyone a moment to turn their cameras on. And if you do decide through the course of the comment that you do have something to say and you haven't turned your camera on, we absolutely will give you an opportunity to do that once some of the people have spoken. So we certainly don't want to discourage anyone from giving comment at this meeting. And if you are called upon, and we do have a few people that are joining us that we don't have their full names yet. If you are called upon, if you could please state your name for the record, that would be helpful for our record keeping purposes and to ensure that your comments are properly noted in the proceedings of tonight's meeting. Carrie, I'll let you begin calling people if you wish.
Thank you. So we have Rennie Larson first.
Can you hear me, Carrie?
Yes, we
can
can.
hear you.
Okay. Is it possible to share screen from my computer to everyone for some of the discussion?
I believe you have that option.
All right. So I'm here tonight representing my client and my spouse, and I'm not going to reveal whether this is pro bono work or not. There's certainly a lot of time that has passed since 2016 when the application first came in. And I find it really disconcerting that we have been given the documents, the studies that were done by the applicant, as of January 25th was the date when I was able to download them. I may be out by a couple of days, but certainly there hasn't been adequate time to discuss that with the fellow people that we live with at Trout Lake in the community. And certainly not enough time to allow us to get reviews by professionals to ensure that the reports meet all the requirements of Ontario law. So my main purpose this evening is to ask the Lakehead Rural Planning Board if you could set a date in September to have your decision meeting and give us adequate opportunity to submit further studies and to make comments and bring all of the information onto the table. If Mr. Port's comments earlier are taken as the timeline, and he was saying 4 to 6 weeks from the time he's gathered all of the agency comments, that certainly is a very narrow time frame for us to respond responsibly to the studies that have taken, in some cases, a year for that information to be gathered and processed by the experts of Lempiella. So that's my main request tonight, is set a meeting date in September when you're going to make your decision, and let's all work towards that meeting in harmony so that everyone is heard and we're not going through the same process as last time, where we had to beg to be admitted as deputants to every meeting. Some people got on, some people didn't get on. And I think it's very important that the planning board listen to the people. The lands that my wife Leslie owns is the former Boy Scout camp. It was donated by Oscar Stiff in 1942. And it was 16 acres when he donated it. It was enlarged to 77 acres in 1943. It sits on the easterly side of the McIntyre River. It has a common boundary of the riverbank for about 2,000 feet with the Lempiella lands. The Boy Scouts sold the property to Leslie in 2006. Under the current Gorham zoning, there's a special clause that allows for continued use of the 8 existing cabins and the related accessory buildings to be used for seasonal tourist rental accommodation. And under the rural zone, it can also be used for a year-round residential dwelling. The zoning bylaw that we have now defines a sensitive land use, meaning any building or structure where people sleep, or an institutional use or certain recreational uses, and may include, but is not limited to, residence, motel, hotel, retirement home, hospital, school, place of worship, daycare, or any lands used for campground, mobile home park, or picnic areas. There's no doubt that 80 Trout Lake Road, which is the Boy Scout camp, qualifies as a sensitive land use when measuring the impending impacts of the Lempiella proposed aggregate extraction. It is respectfully submitted that the studies carried out by Lempiella have not taken this sensitive land use on abutting property into account. And I think one of the significant points I have to say after listening to planner Jeff Port is that the range of options to be included before the board, one of them would be simply to deny the rezoning application. That should be a decision that is on the table and could be taken by Lempiella. It's simply not a matter of saying, well, Lempiella's got a right to their use and you guys got a right to your uses, and we'll try to make sure that you can live together by by appropriate setbacks and berms and buffers and that. Like, we are firmly against this use, and we want the board to consider the opportunity now to shut down this application on your decision day and to deny it. We believe that that is an opportunity that is available to this board simply to refuse the application. I'm going to leave that. I wanted to share my screen now if I can, and I am going to find out how to do that. Sorry. It's a, here's the screen I want. No, I'm sorry. That's the wrong one. Okay, that's the applicant, and what I'm going to discuss with this one is that I've had some discussions with M&R, and there is a new boundary for the wetlands complex that's shown along the river and is also shown along the boundary of the southern boundary of the property. Where I'm moving my arrow, my pointer now, my mouse, there is an area here where the wetlands comes up into this buffer zone. And I'm going to submit that information to Mr. Port, and he's certainly welcome to check it with M&R. And to, if this should go ahead, then that 120 meters that's shown here on this sketch should be moved up to conform with the wetlands that comes into the Lempiella lands. So that's a very important point. Mr. Huzan, in his comments that were made along with the application, and I don't understand it, because a buffer is a buffer is a buffer, and it shouldn't be used for anything but natural vegetation or the implementation of berms and further natural vegetation. It should be undisturbed. But when I read his comments that in the M2 buffer zone, a later application could be made to M&R for aggregate to be extracted from that buffer zone. That is an extreme contradiction, and I will be pointing out in my written comments to Mr. Port the arguments as to what a buffer zone should be as defined in the Rural Planning Board. So I believe I've taken 5 minutes by now, Mr. Chair, and I certainly will be making further submissions in writing to Mr. Port and Kerry, so that this information will be before the Planning Board when it does make its decision. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Larson. If you could please stop sharing your screen.
Yeah, that's a good, oh, here it came back to me. Stop share. There we go. There you go.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Carrie, who do we have next?
Sure. Our next speakers are Kevin Matthews and/or Robin Latimer. They're sitting together.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Good evening to the board. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. Good evening, residents. We are here again today in a familiar place, maybe not for you or I, but certainly for the established residents of Trout Lake and the surrounding areas. For over 40 years, our community has stood firmly in opposition to this proposed zoning variation. Since the early 80s, our residents have worked together and fought hard to keep Trout Lake safe and thriving. Today, again, we stand together opposed to this variation application. In fact, if you read back to the original application made around 1979, 80, 81, over 40 years ago, the decision dated March 31st, 1982, You'll see that there were over 300 objectors to the proposal at that time, most of them represented by council and some of them who attended. It was notable by the OMB at that time that there was no public support of any kind. That effectively remains the same today. Although rezoning applications on this property have been around for over 40 years, the community at and around Trout Lake has been thriving for much, much, much longer. In fact, in 1982, the OMB accepted that the area around Trout Lake has been developing as major recreational space for the past 50 years. I'm not a mathematician, but that puts us around 1930 or so, well before any application for rezoning of this property. I heard Mr. Port indicate that for some reason or another that this is identified as only seasonal cottagers that live there. I can use one hand to count at least 5 residents that live full-time along the edge of the property line in which this proposed variation is taking place. Today, Trout Lake is a recreational space, yes, but it's much more than that. And the overall impact of this proposal is significant. Maybe even more relevant in the age of COVID, when numerous residents, I know of at least 3 honorable board members, speaking to you, I'm 3 residents at least who work from home on a regular basis. Many of us cared for our children in COVID at home on the edge of this property on a regular basis for the last 2 years. These are our homes where we raise our families, where we care for our loved ones, where we give back to our community and our province. This proposal is simply not compatible with the surrounding thriving community. These are our homes, not just the source of our next dollar. On this basis alone, it is submitted with all due respect that the application should be dismissed. But if you don't agree with dismissing the application today, I would certainly ask you to reconsider further consultation. I would suggest to you that it's important for many reasons, or here are just a few. As I mentioned, we live here, we work here, we play here, and we raise our children on this property. We don't just hang out in the summer. We've done this for generations. The children deserve to be protected from the possible harmful side effects of this operation. I'll give you an example. For example, last year when the helipad was moved to the other fire and rescue hall up the road, we didn't do nothing with the helipad. What we did is we converted it back to its original use. Again, a use that was there well before any application on this property. It's now parkland. So had you come out there and seen it this past summer, you would have seen children playing on the play structure, kids playing baseball, residents having fires. So the buffer here, the real buffer we're talking about is actually kids. That's what's the buffer between this particular proposed use and our homes. It's children. You should adjourn this meeting to get a complete picture of just how long this community has thrived. Maybe getting some longstanding members of the community on record about the lake and its history and its vibrance would be valuable. In addition, the meeting has once again been scheduled for some reason, February the 3rd. What are we today, -20? I can tell you 2 people that I don't believe are on the line today because they're just simply not in the jurisdiction. The Shanks brothers, who fought hard against this proposed variation some 40 years ago, were unable to attend. Many other residents were unable to attend this virtual meeting because they simply don't attend necessarily like the rest of us, or like at least some of us do in Trout Lake year round. To get a complete picture of the opposition to this proposal, you must hold further consultation. Mr. Larson has already indicated the further time to evaluate the reports. That's obvious. These are expert reports and we're not experts in this area. But more specifically, I can tell you something that frightens me, and it frightens me because I've raised it about our children. Recently, traffic consultations have taken place. I expect Ms. Peterson will talk about this. I expect you've received other material on this. I predict that if these pits are allowed to continue further up the road, this one, that you're going to see death and destruction on these highways. That's what you're going to see. You're going to see hundreds of dump trucks traveling these roads, passing by our school buses, passing by our children, passing by our commuters. You should also know that the enrollment at the Gordon Ware School is also consistent with what I'm telling you. It's increasing because this is a thriving community. This is not just a hangout space for people that come and we live here, and a lot of us live here. And some 6 of us live directly on the property line that you're talking about. This is not a coincidence, honorable board members, that all of a sudden we have this meeting again in the winter. This is not a coincidence that the same buffer that we've been dealing with. This is not good planning. It's been recommended that industrial extraction should not be approved next to residential land use. It's been certainly said in the opposite, that residential quarters should not be permitted next to industrial aggregate extraction. What's the difference here? You're asking us to concede or agree to aggregate extraction next to our homes where we live and raise our children. I'm going to finish with this, if I may be given just one more minute. The LPAT didn't just say, come back and take a look at this, rubber stamp this. The LPAT spoke very loud and clear in their decision in setting this back to the LRPB. And I urge the board, with all due respect, to read pages 26 to 29 of that decision. In particular, paragraphs 109 and 111, and I'll finish up there. Paragraph 109 said this: in this circumstance, the tribunal is only offered the hope that the impacts will be appropriately mitigated by requirements that the MNRF may impose. The tribunal cannot abrogate its responsibility to another jurisdiction to evaluate what rightly falls in what is now the ambit of the tribunal's jurisdiction. And that is the determination of the principle of the land use. We are principally opposed to this variance, obviously. Paragraph 111. The Act, the PPS, and the official plan applicable to the unorganized township of Gorham stress balance and compatibility between land uses. Contrary to that mandatory direction, the LRPB focused solely on the provisions of the planning documents which support aggregate extraction and did not consider the provisions which support recreational and residential land use and environmental protection. The tribunal finds that the LRPB failed to appropriately consider the PPS and official plan policies that relate to land use compatibility in relation to this application. Mr. Hewson effectively said exactly what he said the last time that this matter was up, and didn't really reference anything that the LPAT suggested that the LRP should consider. One reality remains the same, honorable members of the board. Whether you agree to further consultation or not, one thing is not going to change. The community around Trout Lake, the community around the surrounding area, oppose this business venture strongly. That's not changing. So this time around, living with the decision to okay aggregate extraction next to a thriving residential community is yours to make. Respectfully, we urge the board to dismiss the application now. Otherwise, we urge the board to give us what we asked for some 2 to 3 years ago, which would be a public consultation meeting where you can see the true and complete picture of opposition from this thriving residential community. Thank you.
I have just one more thing to add, if I can. Since there's 2 of us, I believe we have enough time for me to add something. I just wanted to address the fact that there's been a lot of reports about the environmental impacts and the surrounding, but one thing that I find odd that hasn't been addressed is actually Trout Lake itself. So in none of the studies have I seen reports on how this is going to affect the lake. There's talk about the river and the wetlands, but we haven't actually discussed the lake. And I want you to be aware that over the past summer, we've had actually algae within the lake. So I think that suggests the fragility of this lake. I think as Northerners, we value our freshwater lakes. I don't think we want to be like our neighbors down south with overfished lands and lakes that aren't thriving, that are completely desolate and not able to support any ecosystems. And I think we need to think about that when we consider putting a gravel pit next to a lake. It might not be directly against the lake, but it's close enough to impact it. I'm certain of that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. Carrie, who is next up?
Next, we have, I believe, Karen Peterson.
Go ahead, Ms. Peterson.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to respond. I'm the president of the Trout Lake Campers Association, and for the record, I'd like it to be noted that I've also got Dr. Karen Peterson. I've got a doctorate degree in environmental design and planning. So I have a number of things. I've kind of changed my report a couple of times just listening to what people have been saying and the concerns that have been raised. The main thing, I wanted to address what Alex Novak had raised in regards to the difference between the planning stage and the licensing stage. And it's really important that I think the board realizes that they have to get the zoning right. If you don't get the zoning right, then we're going to be really down the drain, so to speak. And there's 2 steps to really approving a license. So the first one is planning. And the question that needs to be asked at the planning stage, is this a good location for a gravel pit? And I think all the opposition in regards to this is all about this is a poor location to locate a gravel pit right next to a lake, right abutting people's properties. There's provincial significant wetland that is being evaluated and is still sitting on the books at MNR. They haven't approved it yet. There's a lot of questions in regards to this whole concept of why this is even going forward. It doesn't make any logical sense. You talk to any people on the street about having a gravel pit next to a lake and they say, what's going on over there? Like, this is ridiculous. And it is ridiculous. The second step is the licensing, and that's focused on the operations. And a lot of these studies, I had a quick look at these studies. I'm not an expert in groundwater and noise and so on, but I had a quick look at these studies, and they're focused on operations. They're not focused on the planning aspects. The planning aspect would take into consideration the surrounding landscape and the impacts that it's going to have on the people. There's no relationship between what they identify within these studies and what does that mean to the people that are living there. What I asked in my first letter, I wrote 2 letters into the board. The first thing I asked for is that we need, there isn't being a social impact assessment, hasn't been tabled, and yet the LPAT has requested that it needs to be balanced. Jeff Port has recognized the importance of balance in a planning regime, but there's no reports here on what are the social impacts and how do these things interconnect and relate. They do not stand alone. And by focusing on the studies that are only on a site-specific area, and even in one of those studies, the report, I think it was the environmental impact statement, talked about cumulative effects in regards to almost adding up all the impacts that are within that site. Well, that's not what cumulative impacts are about. Cumulative impacts are about what's happening in the region. What are the other activities that are happening? They mention about there's a rock solid pit just around the corner, but there's been nothing but complaints. There's fly rocks in people's yards. There's shaking of people's property. There's noise. I can hear it at my end of the lake. MNR can't, they don't seem to be able to address it. The Ministry of Environment can't address it. So how are they going to address any kind of impacts that are going to be happening at Lempiala? They can't address what's happening in our neighborhood. There's also the issue with what's happening up on Gilbride Road. There's 2 pits on Crown land, and there's been a lot of issues being raised in regards to the number of trucks that are going to be coming down that road and how that's going to impact, again, magnify the social and environmental impacts to our lake. So I did ask that the planning board request or have the proponent or the applicant submit a social impact assessment. When you talk about rehabilitation, that's another thing. Now, how many pits around this area have ever been rehabilitated? There's a lot of issues in regards to what's the material that's going to be going into those pits. And right now there's an ERO that's looking at excess soils, and there's some real concern about the contamination of those soils, whether it's chemical or whether it's bringing in invasive species from other areas and then dumping it right there in the pit at Trout Lake. There's lots of concerns. We are having problems at Trout Lake now with the algae, and I agree with Robin that there's nobody looking at the lake. The noise, for example, they have all these receptors around to determine the noise, but noise carries across the lake, and nothing has been considered in that regard. I've probably taken up my 5 minutes. I really appreciate the opportunity, but please look at the 2 documents that I've written. I've tried to be a little bit more specific in what's missing within the studies, what's missing even within the planning report, because what the official plan does talk about is consideration for the rural character and maintaining the character of this region, and that's not going to happen when there's going to be a gravel pit there, 1 around the corner and 3 more up the road. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. And Carrie, who is next on our list?
So the last person who turned their video on when we first started this was Rob Macy.
Go ahead, Mr. Macy.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Rob Macy and I live at 218 Trout Lake Road, which is half a mile across from the proposed Lempiala site. Silvio has said that the life of the pit operations would be 5 to 7 years. However, the effects of the proposed amendment will be felt by the campers, the health of the lake, and the flora and fauna in the region for decades or perhaps forever. Listed below are the reasons for declining any pit operations. Noise disturbance, the location and close proximity, i.e. immediately beside the lake and the campus properties to the proposed operations translates to lake residents and surrounding region being subjected to noise of an industrial nature. This is not a compatible land use. High on the list of offenders is the dreaded backup beepers. There is no doubt that the ongoing backup beepers will be clearly heard from early morning to late afternoon for years to come. This is not beneficial to the mental health of the campers being exposed to this irritant all day long, day after day. We are already being subjected to the disturbance caused by Trannis's rock crusher located to the southeast of the lake. Of course, there will be all sorts of other truck noises, diesel engines, tailgate slamming, front end loaders, etc. And I looked through the reports quickly, and I did not see where they replicated the backup beepers and had receptor sites around the lake to see if they could hear it. Property values. There's no doubt that property values at the lake and surrounding area will plummet if the proposed pit becomes operational. The location of the pit is right beside the main turnoff to Trout Lake Road to the camps. Everyone that lives, visits, etc. the lake must pass the pit and associated operations. It will serve as a marquee to our lake, an undesired one. If I was thinking of buying a property at the lake, this would certainly deter me from buying there. Who wants to live beside an industrial operation? No one. Underground water systems naturally occurring. Lempiala's groundwater reports talk about the level of the water table, but fails to address the impact on the naturally occurring underground springs that feed campers well and the lake itself as they flow northwards towards the lake. Once these springs and water filtering systems in the ground are disturbed, they cannot be reintroduced or replicated. This water source to the lake will be lost forever, having negative consequences to the lake. Examples are lowering of the lake level, less fresh water, easy for algae blooms to form, etc. And who's going to guarantee that the wells don't dry up for the people in those areas? The Lakehead Road Planning Board, Silvio? I doubt it. Areas struggling under detrimental uses. Trout Lake, the lake is an ecosystem, is already struggling under many different types of stressors. The crown land adjacent to the lake on the east was clear cut 3 years ago, which has disrupted water drainage and wildlife. The area to the southeast has been clear cut and is currently operating as a quarry. The crown land to the west was clear cut in the early 2000s and is a site of an open pit disposal site, i.e. a dump for decades, which is now in recovery. Trout Lake is also under additional anthropological stress from the inhabitants around the lake, introducing septic fields, clearing more land, construction of new dwellings, additional year-round dwellings, fertilizers onto gardens and lawns which find their way into the lake, introduction of foreign species and other types of wildlife being introduced into the lake, altering the natural ecosystem. Let's not add another stressor to the pile. Extraction rezoning to be denied. Airborne pollutants. When considering the position of the proposed pit, which occupies the southwest corner of the lake, and the direction of the prevailing wind directly from the south, it stands to reason that the particles and particulates from the pit operations will be carried northward and deposited on the lake and surrounding properties. This includes not only dust from the operations, trucks, front-end loaders, etc., but the effluents from the diesel exhaust. This can't be good for anyone or anything except for money in Silvio's pocket. Eastern boundary of the proposed pit. I was shocked to see the boundary at the east end has shrunk and is now closer to the McIntyre River. The black spruce buffer appears to be reduced. How can this be conscientious economic planning? Fauna habitat. Considering the footprint of the operation, it is hard to imagine that taking the natural land and converting it into a gravel pit will have inconsequential impact to the wildlife. On the wildlife's behalf, I would like to denounce this operation categorically. On behalf of the people who enjoy spotting a fox or an owl once in a while, I categorically denounce the approval of the rezoning. In summary, I denounce the rezoning of the Lempreala property to M2 extraction at this time or any point in the future. There are no benefits to Trout Lake residents or to Trout Lake itself, only the detrimental effects as outlined above. There is no shred of compatibility here, and the application should be denied. In particular, many of the impacts are highly speculative in nature, i.e. effects on wells, lake levels, declining levels of wildlife. No one can predict with any certainty the actual outcome. Let's not ruin a recreational region with incompatible adjacent uses. The area is already under too much stress. Signs like existence of a blue-green algae bloom demonstrates this stress. Let's not add another one to the equation. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Macy. I see we have a few other people with cameras on. Do you have anyone else on your list, Carrie?
I don't have anyone else on my list, but it does appear that perhaps Sean Mulligan would like to speak.
If you would like to speak, go ahead, Mr. Mulligan.
My name is Tracy. This is Sean Mulligan, my partner. We're longtime friends of Trina Diner, and she resides 62 Trout Lake. That's her summer camp. And I'm just hoping to lend today some balance, maybe from the social perspective. It looks like everyone has covered the technical aspects very thoroughly. And if I could echo a little bit of what Kevin Matthews and Robin Latimer touched on, in regards to COVID and mental health, it's been the case for myself the better part of 10 years, Sean as well. It's definitely a place of reprieve. Many of us friends have gathered there during hard times, whether it was separation, mental health issues, depression, whether it was someone in our circle even reporting sexual abuse and trauma in childhood. It was somewhere where we would go to heal. It is, I think, a place of healing. So yes, for the children, as well as the adults. What I've seen there over the summers, and especially the last two, in that helipad area that was touched on, I did see, and it was quite enjoyable actually, to see all of the children playing in that field and parents playing catch with the children, seeing animals and dogs run free. I think during COVID, especially, like he was saying, this is paramount to a lot of people's mental health, and it is a place of reprieve, relax, enjoyment. It's a place to get away. And I don't know if there's something Sean would like to add, but definitely from the social perspective, I don't think it can be stressed enough how important that is, especially during these times. So yes, from environmental to the economic points that Rob made, and many other members here, some I know, some I don't yet, and I hope to meet you maybe this summer. But it's certainly been a place of healing for friends and family from what I've seen and what I've experienced out there.
And just to echo what Kevin and Renee had said earlier, I think the disclosure of all the facts presented have been not foreclosed in a timely manner for everyone to be that are going to be impacted by this decision to actually take a look at it and evaluate it at a professional level so that they can report additionally back with the information needed. As Renee said, if they can have till possibly September so that this information could be put forward to all the members that are going to be impacted, they can review it, evaluate, and be better prepared to discuss this, would be a better means to deal with this than just have a format on February 3rd, when, like I said, most people aren't available and a lot of people aren't out there right now to actually show the environment in which they are living. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Carrie, do we have anyone else that would like to?
It looks like Brian McKay just turned his video on if he is interested in speaking.
Thank you very much, Carrie. Mr. Chair, board members, thanks very much for the opportunity to speak tonight. Like many of the citizens here tonight, I'm very opposed to any development of the gravel pit operation close to what we call a residential area. And I might add community. This is the Trout Lake community, as was pointed out by Robin and Kevin, has been in existence for many, many years. And it isn't just as a group of people, cottagers going to the lake, as you've heard already. And I guess I won't repeat everything because I certainly support many of the comments that have been made. But what I would like to encourage the board to consider is how do you really expect to measure the social impact? And it's been identified by Jeff that has to be balanced. How do you plan to really measure the social impact of this decision without any meaningful input by every resident in the area that has an opportunity? I mean, you provide an opportunity here at a meeting for people to come out. The timing is questionable at best, but what about asking every member of the community, surveying every member of the community and asking them for input if you really want to truly measure the social impact of the decision you're about to make? So I encourage you respectfully to decline this application, and thank you very much for the opportunity to have input.
Thank you very much, Mr. McKay. Do we have anyone else, Carrie?
I do not see anyone else on video. If anyone else is interested in speaking, please. Oh, it looks like maybe Jeff. Jeff, I don't have your last name. You're muted.
You're muted, Jeff.
My apologies. Jeff Walters. And I just want to make it clear that I'm acting as a private citizen here and not with my day job. So I'm very opposed to this zoning application. This is simply just not a compatible land use. I've sat through many zoning meetings in my professional career. And, you know, if you have something that you have this many neighbors opposed to a proposal, it's obviously a bad sign. This just simply isn't compatible with the existing land uses around here. I don't understand why the board would just simply not reject this application. That is a tool that's available to the board. And I think it's important that you certainly take the neighbors' opinions and concerns and thoughts very seriously. And this is more than an economic project. This is something that's going to disrupt many hundreds of families' lives and investments, of course, and relaxation and peace of mind and so on. I don't want to repeat what everybody else has said because they've certainly done a very good job, and I did thank them for that. I haven't been able to participate in this yet because of, once again, professional commitments. But tonight I felt it was finally time to stand up and voice my opinion. I have extreme concerns if this is approved, and I would question why the board would be able to come to a rational decision to approve this project. So I think it's very obvious where I stand with this, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walters. I see one more person just turned her camera on. Go ahead, Ms. Diner.
Everyone, thank you for your time. And I just want to echo what everyone else has said, and that I'm opposed to this completely. And so I hope the board would reject the application. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Have you received any other notes of people that want to speak, Carrie?
No, I have not.
I will give a couple of, I'm just looking on the other page here. I don't see any other cameras on. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? And if you aren't able to turn your camera on, that's okay too. You're still welcome to speak. Oh, we have a Sharon McKinnon. Go ahead, Ms. McKinnon.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I just wanted to add to all the great comments that are against the gravel pit tonight. I'm one of the families that has been at Trout Lake for close to 100 years, if not more. My mother's grandmother's family started going out there picnicking when there were no roads or hydro or anything else. And then the properties were sold from the Crown to the property owners, and it has stayed in the family. I would say there's probably a dozen families, if not more, I can't say 100% for sure, that have been on that lake for close to 100 years. And there is no way that a gravel pit can enhance our quality of life out there. There's not one good thing about it. We live in Northwestern Ontario. There is gravel available, lots of locations. I understand we need the gravel, but it doesn't need to be butting up against a lake that has over 100 people's families living on. It doesn't need to be butting up against the headwater of the McIntyre River that affects thousands of people out there and in the city of Thunder Bay. So I just like to put it on record that I'm strongly, strongly opposed to the gravel pit. And we've been fighting this for so long, it feels like it's never ending. Just goes on and on and on with every new owner. So it would be nice if it was just put to an end once and for all. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? And as I mentioned earlier, if you are unable or are not comfortable with turning your camera on, that is okay too. So you do need to please speak up now so we understand and are properly able to record and hear your comments. Oh, we have a Carolyn Johnston that's got her camera on. Go ahead, Ms. Johnstone.
I don't have a lot to say other than I just want to put it on record how opposed I am to this. I think, or I would only be repeating what was earlier said, but it's just such an incompatible land use to the abutting properties and to so much enjoyment that people have had for so many years on the lake. I just want it formally on the record how opposed I am to it and how uncompatible I think the two land uses are. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Is there anyone else that would like to add to the comments this evening? I will call again. Is there anyone else who would like to add to the comments this evening? And the third and final time, I will call again for comments in opposition to the application this evening. Seeing no one else, I would like to thank all the people who commented for your respectful tone and for all the detailed information you're able to give us. And also like to thank everyone for trying to keep within time, which is appreciated by everyone here this evening. We will move on to the next item on the agenda. And that is asking the board if there are any further questions for either Mr. Port, our planner, or for the staff, or of the applicant. Okay. Seeing no further questions. If anyone has looked through the agenda, which of course was available on our website, it does say that the chair has concluding remarks, and in conclusion, just like to thank everyone for attending and for giving the comment this evening. And it also says that the bylaw will be considered at the regular board meeting held later in the evening. We will not be making a decision that was outlined earlier. We will not be making a decision on this application at tonight's board meeting. But we will be waiting to properly get all the information that's been presented both this evening and that we will possibly be receiving in written form and receiving from provincial agencies before we come anywhere close to making a decision. And we're also waiting for the final report from our planning consultant. So. Is there anything else with regards to this application, Carrie, that I'm missing?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, great. Okay, then we do have item 6 on our agenda, debate and decisions relating to applications that are held in advance. Is there anything new with regard to that?
Conveniently, the applicant of this is actually on the line. I don't have an answer as to whether or not we are continuing to hold this in abeyance or not. If Rennie Larson is still on the line and would like to advise us of that.
Go ahead, Mr. Larson, if you can. We've had this one on our agenda for a couple of years now. If you've got any updates, it'd be great.
I'm on, right? Okay. In the circumstances, and I've talked with Mr. Port, or we've communicated by email and with Carrie, and they pointed out the necessity of carrying out a lake study. And I don't think that's something that an individual should have to do. And I think the appropriate thing would be for us to withdraw the application before the board. And should we decide that at some point in the future that it would be appropriate that, but there's a lot on the plate at Trout Lake, and I don't think this is an important thing that we have to deal with at this point in time. All right, so we'll withdraw the application so you won't have it sitting on your list.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Larson. If we need any more information, or if there needs to be any documents dealt with for that, we will get back to you. I guess that works, right, Carrie?
That's right. Yeah.
I can give you an email withdrawing it.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. Okay, unless there is something else for the public meeting portion of this evening, I have a resolution to adjourn this portion of the meeting. Can I have a mover and a seconder? We have Bob and Gordon. Resolution number 016-2022. It's been moved and seconded that the February 3rd, 2022 public meeting of the Lakehead Rural Planning Board be adjourned. The time being 7:18 p.m. Anyone opposed to this resolution? Seeing none, we are going to move into the regular meeting agenda. So I will call this meeting to order. And can I have a mover and a seconder for this meeting? Rudy and Gordon. It's been moved and seconded. Resolution 10017-2022 that the February 3rd, 2022 regular meeting of the Lakehead Rural Planning Board be opened. The time being 7:19 p.m. Anyone in opposition? Seeing none. We have an agenda to approve. Can I have a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda, please? Wendy and Bob. It's been moved and seconded. Resolution 018-2022 that the February 3rd, 2022 regular meeting agenda of the Lakehead Rural Planning Board be approved. Anyone in opposition? Seeing none. Move into the agenda items. Do we have any disclosures of pecuniary interests? Seeing none, we will move on. We have no deputations. We have a bylaw which we just had an extensive discussion about. Carrie, is there anything to add or anything we need to do with this at this time?
No, there is not. It was there simply if the board wanted to add any comments or concerns for the record.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. McMaster.
Oh, thank you. Just curious, did you need a motion to table this in any fashion just to make it official? And hold it for the next meeting? Just curious, just asking.
I don't actually know the answer to.
I'll move that we just table this until the next meeting. Just give it, I guess, sort of an official nod.
Okay. Do we have a seconder for that motion? Wendy? I will give you a moment to scribble that up, Carrie or Chelsea, whoever's doing it.
If it just says that the board moves to table the discussion on ZBLA 01/2016 regarding the Lampiella sand and gravel zoning application to a future meeting.
I would accept
Yes.
that. Thank you.
Okay, anyone in opposition to that motion? Seeing none, thank you. We will move on. We have the minutes of the previous meeting from January 6, 2022. And we have a resolution. I have a mover and a seconder for the minutes. Bob and Axel. Resolution 019-2022. It's been moved and seconded that the Lakehead Rural Planning Board approves the minutes of the January 6, 2022 regular meeting as presented. First off, is there any errors or omissions in those minutes? Seeing none, is there anyone in opposition to the motion to approve the minutes? Seeing none, the minutes are hereby approved. Next on our agenda is minutes of matters arising from the minutes. We have our draft 2022 budget. Go ahead, Carrie.
Okay, so after the last meeting, it was recommended that we put together a budget that is based on the potential raise in our planning application fees, as well as balancing the budget, of course. Also, a change from the last meeting is that our consulting and legal fees have been increased to 10,000. Having Mr. Port acting as our planning consultant on files such as the one that we discussed this evening is going to substantially increase the fees that we have been paying in the past. So that value is to ensure that we have enough money put aside for him.
Okay, are there any questions or comments from the board on the proposed budget? Do we actually have, when would we be approving this budget, Jerry?
Sorry, Chelsea, is there a resolution to approve it tonight? There is a resolution to approve it tonight.
Do we have any questions or comments on the budget? Otherwise, I will ask for the resolution to approve. Okay, can I have a mover and a seconder to approve the budget? Gordon and Bob. It's been, I'm assuming it's been moved and approved to approve. It's been moved and seconded to approve the 2022 budget of the Lakehead Rural Planning Board is the way the resolution will read. Correct me if I'm wrong, Carrie.
That's how it reads, yes. Sorry.
Is there anyone in opposition to this resolution? Seeing none, the budget is hereby approved. That moves us to, is there any other matters arising from the minutes?
No.
Okay, that moves us to item 7 on our regular meeting agenda, which is reports, tariff of fees bylaw report.
Okay, so as I mentioned, when talking about the budget, we had discussed raising the application fees for the Lakehead Rural Planning Board. We do typically follow what the municipality of Oliver Poonch charges, and they increased their planning fees January of this year. So the tariff of fees, I believe it was in your package in draft form with the schedule showing the proposed new fees. We're looking at $800 for consents, minor variances, validation certificates, rather than the $500, an increase to $1,500 for zoning amendments and official plan amendments to $2,000.
Any question or comment on the increase in tariffs and fees? As was outlined by Carrie, this is kind of following along what Oliver Poonch is proposing to do. So that's, we've gone through all the effort of doing comparators with other municipalities and stuff like that. So we think they're pretty reasonable, at least in Oliver Poonch. Okay, we do have a resolution. If I could have a mover and a seconder to approve the fee increase. Bob and Wendy, resolution number 021-2022. It's been moved and seconded that the chair and secretary treasurer are hereby authorized to execute bylaw 01-2022, being a bylaw to establish the general tariff of fees and charges for the Lakehead Rural Planning Board on behalf of the Lakehead Rural Planning Board. Is there anyone in opposition to this resolution? Seeing none, that is approved. Now we will move on to correspondence, item 9 on our agenda.
Okay, so we have received from the city of Thunder Bay 1 notice of passing and 3 notices of public meeting. None of the properties associated with the public meeting information are anywhere near our boundaries. I don't have any comments, but if the board does, I can certainly submit them on our behalf.
Does the board have, I'm seeing a bunch of shaking heads here, so I'm guessing the board has no comments or anything on these particular notices that came to us from the city of Thunder Bay. Okay, that's fine. We do not require a closed session at this meeting, and which negates the need for any matters arising from the closed session. Is there any new business for this meeting? Mr. McMaster, go ahead.
Sorry. We're going to be sending out official notification, I assume, to all the municipal councils regards to our fee adjustments. I'm just asking.
I would assume
a letter can be sent.
Or if not, may I get one sent to the to Conme?
Yes, I have to send out the invoices for the $250 membership fee. So I can include that in the envelope.
That just makes, it's just simply for, makes ease of reference if somebody asks at our office about these things. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. McMaster. Is there any other new business items for this evening's meeting? Oh, go ahead again, Bob.
Do I owe you money or something? You keep calling me Mr. I'm really enjoying the respect, but thank you so much.
Just trying to be respectful, you know, it's anyhow. Is there anything else from the distinguished honorable members of the Lakehead Rural Planning Board? I must say, prior to this meeting's public, the public portion of this evening's meeting, I was a little nervous about how that was going to go, but it did go very well. I'm very glad that everyone was respectful and respectful of each other's time, and gives us lots to think about. And I just wanted to mention that because, there was a lot of interest in that file, and I think we hopefully were able to give anyone and everyone that was able to give comment. We were able to do that in a meaningful way. Go ahead, Mr. Gordon.
Thank you. After we had this public meeting, and a number of issues came up that I hadn't thought of, and having to read through some of the technical reports. At our next meeting, is it a public meeting where we talk about the reports and what was said? Or do we have this discussion in camera and present something else, more public comments in the open? For example, not to be specific right now because we're still probably in open session, if I disagreed with one of the technical reports that was written, when do I voice that?
I would send correspondence to the board before the next meeting. Jeff is going to work on taking all of the comments and reports that we receive between now and the next meeting. There does have to be a cutoff at some point, which we will have to discuss. But he needs to prepare the recommendation report so that we can make a decision sooner rather than later.
Okay. Yeah. Rennie Larson made a comment that we only have technical reports that were submitted by the applicant. And in my working career at the city and the planning department, we would sometimes get more than one report. We'd get two reports, one from the applicant and one from the opponent. They're both technical reports, but they differed. Their conclusions differed. I mean, we are sitting here asking to believe the applicant's technical report, and not that the proponents probably have a ton of money to start hiring their own consultants, but I think these technical reports should be challenged in some way. And so you're suggesting that I write a letter and say, these are the areas that I think are weak in the report and that they should be looked at?
Yes.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Bob.
Thank you. I'll echo Gordon's thoughts that there are some parts of the reports. There's two things, actually, I guess. First of all, the amount of information in the reports and the time that I had to review it and whatnot really was very, very difficult. So I have one small advantage. I do have some technical background that allows me to understand some of the reports and some of the data and how it was collected, but I'd also like to exchange views with fellow board members in regards to those thoughts and feelings. And I see a report and then I get some feedback, but it's the type of thing, I'm not done speaking for you, Gordon, but it's the type of thing where sometimes you need to say things that may not necessarily be the type of thing that you want in a public forum until you've had a chance to discuss it amongst yourselves and come to some sort of a conclusion. Then we could also conclude that this is a question we got to ask of whoever's submitting that report, and then move forward with that and then get the information back. but I felt that this particular one with Trout Lake, there was just so much data, first of all. And then secondly, and I'll say this out loud to everyone here. I've got a technical background. Some of it required me to stop and think and try to cast back on past experience to understand what was being said or what was being presented and whether or not it was even valid. Trust me, I've seen enough technical reports over the years to say that's garbage. This is actual good quality reporting. I just, how do we manage it? I guess that's the bottom line question. How do we manage this kind of depth of information? What do we need to do in order for us to understand it amongst ourselves and then be able to move forward, I think, in a constructive fashion and make decisions that we're all comfortable with. Not happy with necessarily, but comfortable with. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Bob. Rudy.
I guess the first question would be more directed at Carrie. My recollection is that the Planning Act puts some parameters on how long we have to weigh the information that comes in and make a decision before the applicant is actually entitled to bypass us, I guess, for want of a better word. So can you help refresh my memory and enlighten the board around that issue first?
Certainly. So after a statutory public meeting is held, the board has 90 days to make a decision. We can take longer if we have good reason and the applicant agrees to it. But it is mandated that we have 90 days. Or the applicant could choose to appeal the fact that we have not made a decision.
So 90 days from today.
Correct. So I would recommend that we choose a date collectively where we have to tell the public that they have to submit their comments by. There has to be a cutoff so that we have a period of time to prepare a recommendation report.
Are you suggesting we make that date right now at this meeting?
If the board's comfortable to do that, then I can certainly put that information out to the public.
I would suggest that maybe we should have maybe have a chat with Jeff and see what his suggestion would be before we do that. I mean, we can always get a date and publicize it at our next meeting or decide on it at the next meeting because we do have 90 days here. And he might have a little better insight into what kind of timing we should be looking at.
Yeah, when I spoke with him about this beforehand, he had said a couple weeks after the meeting. But I will certainly touch base with him and get a more firm answer.
And excuse me, it might be worth talking to the applicant as well to see how hard they are on the 90 days or whether they will give us some slack. I mean, the one comment specifically suggested delaying until September. There was certainly an opposing report on some of this stuff the last time around. I think it was referenced in the tribunal hearing as well, and that person spoke at the hearing. Usher, I think the name is.
Yes.
Anyway, we did get those kinds of reports at that time. So.
There was also a biologist that commented on the natural environment study that was done initially too, and he basically shot it down in flames. So I kind of got the feeling that maybe this group is thinking of conducting further studies with respect to some of the information that was provided by the applicant tonight, which is why they want till September for us to make a decision.
And we also want to keep in mind that all of them are up for re-election later this year. So that's kind of the hard opposite end of the spectrum, right? We want to get this done before there's a potential change in the board. Otherwise, someone's going to be walking in and being asked to make some pretty serious decisions without all the input and thought that we've already put into it. So
absolutely.
Thank you for those comments. I know it was mentioned earlier whether some of these discussions could be held in camera. To the best of my knowledge, we need to have, because we have to follow we do follow the municipal act, don't we, Carrie? So, I mean, we need to have some pretty specific reasons to hold discussions in camera, whether what we would like to hold in camera meets that threshold, I don't know, but we could certainly look into that, but that's something that needs to be carefully considered before we decide to do that. Are there any other comments or questions or discussion as new business for this meeting?
Just to add to your comment, Bernie, doing too much of the discussion in camera really leaves a sour taste in the public's mouth. Especially
Absolutely.
around a sensitive topic like this, we need to be as open as possible. And if we're challenging stuff, so be it. That's our job.
Yeah, I wholeheartly agree with that. We need to be open and transparent, and we also need to be seen to be open and transparent. Okay, well, without any further items for this meeting, I will ask for a mover and a seconder for the adjournment to the meeting. Bob, Rudy. It's been moved and seconded for resolution number 022-2022 that the February 3rd, 2022 regular meeting of the Lakehead Rural Planning Board be adjourned. The time being 7:40 p.m. Anyone in opposition? Seeing none, thank you everyone for your time and attention this evening, and lots of information I'm all over, and lots of comments to think about. So this is going to be discussed in the future.